I have buried men I liked better than I liked myself, and I have watched good ground go to ruin under a sky that didn't care either way. But I never saw a man lose everything in one night and keep standing, until I saw Amos Kettle walk out to an empty corral with the lantern shaking in his fist. They took the horses. They took the mule and the wagon and the brood mare he'd been saving like other men save a daughter's hand. They took the saddle his dead brother left him, and the rifle that hung above the door and the small things, too. The things a thief takes only to be cruel. And Amos didn't shout. That was the part I couldn't forget. A man who doesn't shout when the world's been stripped off him is a man with something worse than anger sitting in his chest. I'd have told you he was finished. I'd have bet my own bad wages on it. Then 3 nights later, a woman in widow's black came riding down out of the dark hills, leading 4 horses on a rope, with a face like she'd ridden through somewhere none of us would ever come back from. And nothing on that ranch, nothing in my whole crooked life, was ever the same after. This is what I saw. I'm setting it down the way it happened, while I still have it straight. The morning it started, I was counting nails. That's a thing I do, I count. Nails in a coffee tin, fence posts down a line, the days till payment, the seconds between a man saying a thing and meaning it. My mother said I came out of her counting her ribs, and maybe that's a lie she told to make me sound less strange than I am, but I've never been able to leave a number alone. I keep a little tally book in my coat, greased soft at the corners, and a pocket watch with a crack through the glass that hasn't told true time since the war. I wind it anyway. A man needs one useless habit to remind him the rest of him still works. So I was counting nails when Amos came out of the dark with the lantern. I want to tell it slow because it happened slow, even though it was the fastest ruin I ever watched. He stopped at the corral gate. The gate was open. Not broken, open, swung wide and tied back, which is a thing thieves do when they've got all night and no fear of being caught. Lazy men leave a mess. Confident men leave the gate open like a note that says we were never worried about you. I came up beside him. The lantern threw our 2 shadows long across the churned dirt, and the dirt was the only thing left in there. 40 feet of empty pen and the smell of horse still hanging in it, that warm grass and leather smell, going cold even as we stood. Amos, I said. He didn't answer for a while. The crickets were loud. Somewhere off in the dark, a nightbird made its small complaint and quit. They got the mare, he said finally. His voice came out level, too level, the way a frozen pond is level. They got Belle. Belle was the brood mare. I'm not going to pretend I understood, right then, what Belle was to him. I knew she was good blood and he'd paid more for her than the rest of his stock together, and I knew he talked to her low in the mornings the way some men talk to God and some men talk to whiskey. I learned the rest of it later, and when I learned it, I wished I'd been kinder to him in that first hour. But you don't get to choose when the understanding arrives. It comes when it comes, and usually too late to do anybody any good. We walked the place by lantern. They'd been thorough, the way a swarm is thorough. The tack room hung open with nothing on the pegs but a single broken hackamore they hadn't bothered to take. The wagon was gone from under the lean-to, the ruts of its wheels still fresh, leading off northeast toward the breaks where the land folds up on itself, and a man could hide an army of stolen stock. The rifle was gone from over the door. The saddle was gone, his brother's saddle, the one with the worn place on the horn where Cole Kettle's hand had rested 10,000 miles before a fever took him in '71. They took Amos's good boots from beside the stove. They took the little tin of coffee. They took, God help them, the daguerreotype of his wife that he kept on the windowsill, took it for the silver in the case and likely threw the picture in a creek somewhere, and that, I found out, was the one that broke something in him that the horses hadn't. But he didn't shout. He set the lantern on the porch rail. He sat down on the step. He put his hands together between his knees, big cracked hands, and he looked at them like they belonged to a stranger. "You all right?" I asked. Stupid question. The stupidest question in the language. I've never forgiven myself for how many times I've asked it. "I'm thinking," he said. "About what?" "About how a man gets to be 46 years old," he said, "and owns one night's worth of things." I didn't have an answer to that. I'm not sure there is one. I sat down on the step below him and took out my tally book and didn't write anything in it, just held it, because holding it is sometimes the only way I keep my hands from doing something foolish like reaching out to a grieving man who'd sooner be left alone. The sun came up gray and then yellow. The light has no mercy in this country. It showed every empty place. The pen, the lean-to, the pegs. It showed the print of a hard heel in the soft dirt by the gate, a boot heel with a notch cut out of it, deliberate, a mark a man makes so his own track is known to his own kind. I knelt and looked at it a long time. I'm good at marks. I committed it to memory the way I commit numbers. That notch, that off-center wear, the long stride of a tall man who walked like he was used to being followed and didn't care. "You know whose that is?" I asked. Amos came and looked. Something moved across his face, very fast, and was gone. "No," he said. He was lying. I knew it the way you know weather. But a man's entitled to his lies the morning after his life's been stolen, so I let it lie down between us and I didn't pick at it. Here is what I should tell you about Amos Kettle, so you understand the size of what came after. He was not a soft man. He was not even, by the usual reckoning, a good one. He'd done hard things in a hard country and he carried them quiet. He'd come west after the war with his brother Cole, and they'd built the place up out of nothing, out of sweat and stubbornness, and a kind of grim refusal to be beaten that I have only ever seen in men who have already, once, been beaten worse than killing. When Cole died, Amos buried him under the lightning-struck cottonwood by the creek and worked the place alone. And then he married a woman named Ruth who came out from Ohio with a hope chest and a singing voice. And Ruth died of the same low fever that takes so many of the women in this country. Took her in a winter. And Amos buried her beside Cole and went on. He went on. That's the whole of it, and it's everything. He didn't drink it away or shoot it away or ride off and leave the graves to the weather. He stayed and he worked, and he bred up his horses, and he became one of those men the country wears smooth like a river stone, all the soft parts gone and only the enduring shape of him left. I hired on with him in the spring of that year because I'd run out of better men to work for, and I stayed because, I'll be honest, because there was something about the way he kept going that made me want to be near it, the way you want to be near a fire even when you're not cold. I'm a counter and a coward and a man who's left every place that ever needed me. Amos Kettle never left anything in his life. I wanted to learn how that was done. And now horse thieves had come in the night and taken the last of it, and I sat on his step and watched him decide whether to be a river stone or a broken one, and I could not tell which way it would go. He stood up around noon. He looked off northeast at the breaks. "They'll have run them up Coffin Draw," he said. "There's water and there's cover and there's a man up there buys stock without asking questions." He said it flat like reading a list. 2 days' ride, maybe 3. I got no horse. "We could go to the sheriff," I said. He laughed. It wasn't a good sound. Sheriff's in Del Forks, and Del Forks is a day off, and the sheriff is a fat man who's owed money by every rustler in this county. By the time he wets his pants and finds his hat, those horses are sold and gone, and Bell's foal is dropping in some other man's pen. He spat. "No, I'll walk to Hollies' place and see can I borrow a horse and a gun, and I'll go up Coffin Draw myself." "Amos, alone, up against how many?" He looked at me. And here is the thing I keep coming back to. He looked at me not like a man being brave, but like a man who'd already added it up and found there was no other number at the bottom of the sum. "What have I got to lose," he said, "that they didn't already take?" I didn't have an answer to that one either. I'm starting to think my whole life has been a long collection of moments I didn't have an answer to. So we walked, 8 miles to Hollies', both of us in the white heat, and Holly's lent Amos a sway-backed gelding and an old cap-and ball pistol that I wouldn't have trusted to kill a snake, and lent me nothing because Holly's didn't like me and the feeling was mutual. We walked back. Night was coming on, and Amos was checking the old pistol by lantern light, loading it slow and careful with hands that did not shake, when we both heard it. Hoofbeats coming down out of the dark hills, out of the northeast, out of the breaks where the thieves had run. More than one horse, coming slow, coming straight at us. Amos rose with the pistol in his hand, and I picked up the only weapon I had, which was a splitting axe, and I am not ashamed to tell you my heart was going like a struck drum, because we were two men with one bad gun and an axe and they were coming back. The thieves were coming back, and a thief who comes back is a thief who means to leave no witnesses. And then she rode into the lantern light. A woman alone, in black, not the cheap black of poor mourning, but good black gone gray at the seams with travel, a riding dress cut for sitting astride and not side saddle, which I noticed even then because I notice everything. She rode a tall, dark horse, and behind her on a long lead rope she led 4 others, and I knew those 4 others. I had counted them in that corral 100 times. The bay with the white sock, the 2 matched grays, and the brood mare, Belle. She drew up at the edge of the light and looked down at us, at the pistol and the axe and our 2 open mouths, and her face under the road dust was a face I have never been able to describe right, though I've tried in this book a dozen times. It was a young woman's face that something had aged from the inside. It was a face that had seen the thing on the other side of fear and come back from it carrying the cold of that place. She had a cut above her eye, fresh, crusted dark. She had a man's gun belt buckled over the black dress. She looked at Amos a long time. "Are you Kettle?" she said. Her voice was low and worn through, a voice that had been screaming not long ago, or weeping, or both. "I am," Amos said. The pistol had not come up, but it had not gone down. "I brought back what I could," she said. "It isn't all of it. I'm sorry it isn't all of it." And then she swayed in the saddle, and I saw the dark stain low on the side of the black dress that I had taken for shadow and was not shadow, and she said, almost gently, like apologizing for the inconvenience, "I think I'm going to fall now," and she did. Amos caught her before she hit the ground. I have replayed that too, 100 times, the speed of it, the man who'd lost everything dropping the pistol in the dirt and crossing 10 feet in the time it takes the heart to beat once, catching a stranger out of the air like she was the most precious thing left in the world. Maybe by then she was. We carried her into the house and laid her on Amos's own bed, and Amos lit every lamp he had left, which was 2, and I held them close while he cut the black dress away from the wound with a kitchen knife steadier than any surgeon's. She'd been shot, low on the left side below the ribs, and the ball had gone clean through, which is the only luck a gut wound ever gives you, and even that luck is mostly a slower way of dying. She'd packed it herself with what looked like a torn-up underskirt and ridden God knew how far with that packing soaking through. The blood had dried her to the saddle. When we got the cloth away, she made a sound low through her teeth, and her eyes came open, gray eyes, I remember, gray as the matched grays she'd brought back. And she looked at the ceiling and said very clearly, "Did the horses get water?" "I'll see to the horses," I said. My voice came out cracked. "The mare's in foal," she said. "Don't run her, they ran her. I told them not to run her." Her eyes drifted shut. "I told them." I went out and saw to the horses. I'm a coward, as I've said, and the truth is I went partly because I could not stand to be in that room. I watered them and I rubbed them down and I checked Belle over with my hands and she was sound, tired and frightened and sound, the foal still riding high and alive in her, and I stood with my forehead against her warm neck in the dark and I counted her breaths until mine matched them. 12. I counted to 12 and back. It's how I keep from coming apart at the seams. Most people pray, I count. Belle didn't mind either way. When I came back in, the woman was sleeping the gray sleep of the badly hurt, and Amos was sitting beside the bed with his elbows on his knees and his hands over his mouth, and he was looking at her the way I imagine he once looked at Ruth, and the way I know he looked at Belle. And I understood, standing in the doorway with the dark behind me, that I was watching a man fall back in love with the act of having something to lose. After 3 days of owning one night's worth of things, Amos Kettle had been handed back a portion of his life by a dying stranger, and the largeness of it was breaking over him slow. "She gonna live?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. He didn't take his hands from his mouth. "I don't know who she is." "She knew your name." "Everybody knows my name up the draw," he said. "It's painted on my wagon they stole." But he said it like a man arguing with himself and losing. "She woke before dawn, fevered, and she talked. Not to us, to people who weren't there." I sat up with her because Amos had finally gone down in the chair with exhaustion, and I am a watcher and a counter, and someone had to keep the count of her breaths and her fever, and so I am the one who heard it, and I have wondered ever since whether I had the right to. "She talked to a man named Dell. She begged him. 'Don't Dell, he's just a man, he's just an old man with horses, leave him be.' She talked to a child, I think a child, the way you gentle a child, 'Hush now, hush, Mama's coming, Mama's right here.' She said a name over and over that I wrote in my book because writing it was the only thing I knew to do with it. Wade. She said Wade like a wound. And once, near sunup, with the fever cresting, she opened her gray eyes wide and looked straight at me and said, plain as church, 'I rode with them for years. God forgive me. I rode with them for years, and I never said no until last night.' Then she slept, and the fever broke a little with the sun, the way fevers do, and I sat there in the gray light with that in my lap like a stone. She'd ridden with the thieves. She was one of them, or had been. She'd been there, maybe at the corral, maybe holding the horses, maybe just nearby in the dark, when they took everything Amos Kettle owned. And then something had turned her, some final thing past the limit of even her hardened heart, and she'd taken back what she could and ridden through a bullet to return it to a man she'd never met. I didn't wake Amos to tell him. I want to be honest in this book, even where it shames me. I sat on it for 2 days. I told myself it was because she was too sick to question, because the truth would only torment a man who was already drowning in the gift of her, because it wasn't my secret to spend. All of that was true, and under all of it was the cowardly small thing I have lived my whole life by, which is that I did not want to be the one who made the world worse by telling it what it was. But the marks don't lie, and I am a man who reads marks. On the second day, while Amos was out building back his fences with a borrowed hammer, building, you understand, while he had almost nothing, because that is simply what the man did with grief, he built things. I went out to where her tall, dark horse stood in the pen, and I lifted its near hind foot, and I looked at the shoe. And I looked at the boots she'd worn, set by the stove to dry, a man's boots too big for her, that she must have pulled off some man in the dark and ridden in. The left boot heel had a notch cut out of it, off-center wear, a tall rider's long stride. The same heel I'd memorized in the corral, dirt the morning everything was taken. She hadn't just ridden with them. She'd worn the boots of the man who led them. She'd stood at that gate, and I sat down in the straw with my back against the pen rail, and I did the only thing I know how to do when the world gets too big. I counted. I counted the nails in the rail. I counted my own slow heartbeats. I counted the number of ways a man can be a coward, and I had got to a high number indeed when Amos's shadow fell across me and he said, "Calloway, what's the matter with you?" And I looked up at him, at this man who had lost everything and been given back a portion of it by the very hands that took it, and I made the heaviest decision of my small life. I decided to tell him the truth. "Sit down, Amos," I said. "There's a thing you got to know about her, and I've been a coward about it 2 days, and I'm done." He listened without a word. I told him all of it, the boots, the heel, the notch in the corral dirt, the fever talk, Dell and Wade and the child. I rode with them 4 years, and I never said no until last night. I told it plain, the way she'd have wanted it told, I think, because the one thing I'd learned about her in 2 days of counting her breaths was that she had no more use for soft lies than Amos did. When I finished, he sat a long while looking at his cracked hands. You know what this means, I said, because I am also, God help me, a man who has to say the number out loud. Means she was there. Means when they took Belle, when they took Cole's saddle, when they took Ruth's picture off the sill, she was standing in the dark not 10 feet off and she said nothing. I know what it means, Amos said. And you still, I stopped. I still what? He looked at me. There was no anger in it. There was something much worse and much older. Calloway, I have done things in this life that no decent man would forgive. I rode with hard men too before I ever came west in a war that made hard men out of soft boys, and I did things in that war I have never once said out loud, not to Ruth, not to Cole, not to my own God in the dark. He turned his hands over. I never said no either, son, not for a long time. Until one day I did. And the only thing that saved me was that I had somewhere to ride to, and somebody fool enough to take me in when I got there. He stood up. She rode through a bullet to bring back my horses, he said. I'm not going to be the one tells her she rode the wrong way. And he went back to building his fence. I sat in the straw a while longer. Then I got up and went in and sat with her, and when she woke that evening clearer-eyed than she'd been, the fever down, she looked at me and saw something in my face, because she missed nothing either, and she said, quiet, you know. I know, I said. She closed her eyes. Does he? He knows. She was quiet a long time. A tear ran sideways off her cheekbone into her hair, and she did not bother to wipe it. Then why am I still in his bed, she said, and not face down in his creek where I belong? And I, who never have the answer, found I had won this once. Because he built his whole life, I said, on the idea that a person gets to ride the other way. Don't take that off him, ma'am. It's all he's got left and he's giving it to you. Her name was Ardith Vane. The widow part was true. She'd had a husband, a soft-handed Tennessee schoolmaster named Wade who'd come west to teach, and caught a robber's bullet meant for someone else outside a saloon in Coffin Draw 4 years back. And the men who'd done it were Dell Mercer's men, the same Dell Mercer whose boots she'd ridden in. And here is the part I had to make her say twice before I believed it. She had not gone to the law, because there was no law up the draw worth the word. She had gone to Dell Mercer's camp herself, a widow with a husband 3 days in the ground, meaning to kill the man who'd made her one. And Dell Mercer, who was the kind of monster that fascinates people because his cruelty wore a charming face, had laughed at her and not killed her, and instead, worse than killing, kept her, made her useful, made her ride, made her over 4 slow years into one of them, until the line between the woman who'd come to kill him and the woman who held the horses while he robbed old ranchers had worn away to nothing, the way my watch glass wore away to a crack, the way grief wears a man to a stone. There had been a child, too, hers and Wade's, born after his death, dead before its first winter of the same low fever that takes so many. She'd buried it up the draw with her own hands and gone back to Mercer's camp, because by then she had nowhere else that would have her, and nothing left in her that wanted having. And then, she said, we were on the porch by then, days later, her wrapped in a quilt that had been Ruth's, the wound knitting slow and clean, the fever long gone. Then your Mr. Kettle's wagon came up in our talk one night around the fire. Dell said it'd be easy. Old widower no kin, lives alone but for a hired counter. She glanced at me, the ghost of something that on a healed face would have been humor. And I don't know why, Calloway. I have asked myself 1,000 miles worth of why. Maybe because Dell said no kin, and I thought of the box I dug up the draw. Maybe because I was just, finally, full. A person fills up. You can pour wrong into them for years and they hold it, and then 1 cup more and it all comes over the side at once. She pulled the quilt tighter. I went along on the raid meaning to do nothing, same as always. And I stood at that gate in the dark and watched them carry out a saddle with a dead man's handprint worn into the horn. And I watched Dell pocket a silver picture frame and shake the photograph out into the dirt like trash. A picture of some dead woman who'd done nothing to anybody. She stopped, her jaw worked. I picked it up, she said. After they rode, I went back and I picked the photograph up out of the dirt. I don't know why that and not all the rest of it across 4 years. But I picked her up and I looked at her face and I thought, no, just that. No, 4 years late, and I finally said it. She turned her gray eyes on me. I cut 4 horses out of the herd that same night and I led them off, and Dell came after me and we both put bullets in the dark and one of his found me. But I rode the other way. I finally rode the other way. From inside her quilt she drew out a small, water-stained, dog-eared photograph. The silver frame long gone, just the paper picture of a young woman with a singing voice face, and she held it out to me. "Give it back to him," she said. "I can't. It's the one thing I can't do. You give it to him." I took it, and I did not give it to him. I left it on the windowsill where it had always sat, in the cold square of the morning where the frame used to catch the light, and I never told either of them I'd done it. And when Amos found it there the next dawn, he stood looking at it a long time, and then he didn't say anything to anybody, which is how I knew he understood exactly who had brought it home and how far she'd had to ride. Dell Mercer came 11 days later. I've been counting on it in the literal way. I count, and I had counted the days a wounded pride man needs to gather his nerve and his men, and I'd made Amos mend his fences with rifle loops in mind, and I'd ridden the swaybacked gelding to Dell Forks and pried the fat sheriff out of his chair with the one thing that moves a bought man, which is the news that the man who'd been paying him was about to lose, and it'd be healthier to be seen on the other side. So when Mercer came down out of the breaks with 4 riders at dusk, expecting an old man and a counter, he found instead an old man and a counter and a fat sheriff with 3 deputies and a writ. And behind them in the doorway, on her own 2 feet for the first time in 11 days, a woman in black he had thought was dead. It did not go the way it goes in the stories Shanny's other writers tell, the ones with the long gun duel and the hero standing tall. It went fast and ugly and partway wrong, the way real things do. Mercer would not be taken. He went for his gun when the sheriff called him, and the dusk came apart in noise and smoke. And when it was over, 1 deputy was down clutching his arm, and 2 of Mercer's riders had thrown up their hands, and 1 had run, and Dell Mercer himself lay in the dirt of the same yard he'd robbed 11 days before. And he was a long time dying, and he did it cursing. And the last thing he saw on this earth was Ardith Vane standing over him saying nothing at all. She didn't shoot him. I want that written down clear in this book because it matters, because I have heard the story told 3 ways already in Dell Forks, and in 2 of them she's the one pulls the trigger, and that's a lie. She just stood over him while he went and let him look at her and gave him nothing, not forgiveness, not hatred, not even the satisfaction of her grief. She'd spent 4 years of grief on Dell Mercer. She had none left for him. She let him die into her silence, which I think of everything was the truest justice in it. Then she turned around and looked at the photograph on the windowsill, glowing in the last light, and she sat down in the dirt, and finally, 4 years and 1 dead husband and 1 dead child and 1,000 stolen miles too late, she wept. She stayed the winter, the wound healed. Belle dropped her foal in the spring, a long-legged dark filly with a white sock, and Ardith was there in the straw at the foaling with her sleeves rolled and her hands sure, and Amos was on the other side of the mare, and the 2 of them brought that new life into the world together without a word passing between them, and I stood in the door and counted the filly's first breaths. 12. I counted to 12 and back, and I understood that I was, for once, watching something get built instead of taken. I'd like to tell you they married. I'd like to tie it off neat. But it wasn't a neat thing, and they weren't neat people, and the truth is I don't know what they were to each other in the years after because I didn't stay to count it. I'm a man who leaves. I've told you that. Come the next autumn, I drew my wages and shook Amos's hard hand and could not make myself shake Ardith's, only nodded, and she nodded back, and there was a whole conversation in it that I won't pretend to set down because I didn't have the words for it then, and I don't now. But I'll tell you the last thing, and then I'll quit this book a while. The morning I rode off, I looked back once from the rise above the creek, and I saw the 2 of them in the yard, the old man and the widow in faded black, standing a little apart the way people stand who have each done unforgivable things and chosen, anyway, not to ride away. The new filly was nosing at the fence between them. And the light came up gold and merciless over all of it, the way it does in this country, showing every empty place that had been filled back in. And I took out my cracked watch that has never told true time, and I wound it, and I put it away, and I rode on west into a morning that didn't care either way. I never went back. I think about them more than I think about anyone I ever loved. I never did learn what she said to him. Those years I wasn't there to count.